we produce our budget guidance, and then it's flexed based on anticipated volumes. So that, again, should be baked into our budget. And I say should be because, sometimes we find places where volume adjustments look a little bit out of line, and, we find ourselves explaining some of that seasonality that maybe should have got factored in, but didn't, right?
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we will be speaking with Tyler Beck, System Manager of Finance, Budgeting, and Financial Reporting, as well as Supply and Service Resource Management at CommonSpirit. He's got a unique role, Hayes. He kind of sits in this finance role on the supply chain team. We've started to see more of this hybrid kind of roles for supply chain. We even had a chief medical officer that I recently spoke to who's in the chief medical officer of supply chain. So, we've heard about value-based care and value analysis, and that's pulling clinicians into supply chain. But now we're seeing other hybrid roles just to help connect supply chain with all the various functions in a healthcare organization. And Tyler's got a unique story to tell today.
Very unique. And as I said, Tommy from Tulsa, he's going to want to have somebody like Tyler on his team. Listen up, come on, and you'll have a great time today.
Wait, hold on a second. Wait, we're talking about Tommy? I thought he was from Tupelo.
Oh, come on now. That's his brother.
Wait, they're both named Tommy?
Yes, right. But they have different last names. Different.
All right, everybody. Stay with us. We'll be back. Tommy from Tupelo or Tulsa or whatever will be here too. But definitely Tyler Beck coming up next.
Bam! I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
Speaking with Tyler Beck, System Manager of Finance, Budgeting and Financial Reporting, and Supply and Service Resource Management at CommonSpirit. You do have a title that's quite a mouthful, Tyler. I'm not gonna lie, but what's really great about having you on the show is we do have a Power Supply advisory group. One of your colleagues, Derek Gallagher, is on that advisory group, and we've been talking a lot about trying to connect the finance and supply chain perspectives, especially with things like tariffs on the horizon and inflation having a bigger impact than maybe we had seen in the past. And we've had a few different episodes on that, but nobody really has come on to talk about translating the language. And then Derek goes, well, actually, where I work, we have somebody that actually functions in that role, and thus introduced us to you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, of course. Thanks for having me, Justin. I know it's a big title. I usually will just tell people in the wild that I'm a finance manager, and that gets the point across pretty clearly and a little more succinctly too, So yeah, kudos to Derek for bringing me on. I think with my company, CommonSpirit Health, being such a large healthcare organization, has the opportunity for people to focus in more of those niche areas like finance, essentially having a finance department for the supply chain department. So yeah, happy to join the pod and excited to talk to y'all today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. When we talk to supply chain professionals, a lot of times they're like, oh, I never even knew healthcare supply chain existed. I just kind of fell into this. I found my way to it. But, obviously your background is in finance. How did you find your way to supply chain finance?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I fall into that same bucket of sort of falling into it. I went to school for finance, accounting, economics, got my CPA, started off my career in accounting in the audit world for one of the big four public accounting firms. After a couple busy seasons, I decided that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to be doing the rest of my life, and was reached out to by CommonSpirit with this opportunity, and it ended up being a good fit. And up to the point that I started with CommonSpirit, I didn't have a ton of, if any, really healthcare professional experience, right? And I think I was kind of filling a gap there where most of the people that we work with have a really strong healthcare and or supply chain background. And in my role, I can kind of fit in more of a finance specific background and fill some of the gaps that kind of made a well-rounded team, a well-rounded finance department for CommonSpirit's supply chain or SSRM department.
Yeah. Hey, Tyler, you mentioned where you went to school or that you went to college for finance. Where did you go to college and where are you from? Because I think that might be a little interesting. Not everybody's from the state.
Yeah, no, good question. I'm originally from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, small town, about 200,000 now. Was born and raised here and even went to college at Augustana University. Back then it was Augustana College, but Augustana University, which is in Sioux Falls. It's a small liberal arts college of about 2,000 undergrad students. So with that liberal arts background, I was able to get exposure to a lot of different things. I got my degree in business with a finance emphasis, econ degree, and an accounting degree. And while I was there, they were introducing a new MPA program, Masters of Professional Accountancy. So tacked on a fifth year to get that. Loved my time there. It was a great experience. Again, kind of got a wide array of knowledge. And then after college, kind of wanted to get out, try something new after living in Sioux Falls for the first, 21, 22 straight years of my life. So my wife and I moved out to Denver, Colorado. And that's where I started it with public accounting and then eventually with CommonSpirit, as we have one of our admin buildings there, headquarters there.
Gotcha. And Gary, just to know, he was a Viking.
Yes, Augustana Vikings.
Yeah.
Did you just pull that out of your hat right there, Hayes?
I know these things. Yeah,
that's a good pull. Yeah,
That's
well, Hayes was a mascot once, and he appreciates all other mascots. He's a mascot supporter.
Are you making fun of mascots, Gary?
I am not.
Okay,
I
just
love
making
it.
sure.
Absolutely not.
A Viking is like really. That's a good one. That's like yes.
I was a Viking in college. I even had the Viking title. So there you go. I'm with you. So there you go.
Right.
Tyler, I want to come back to. I love that you're coming in with a fresh set of eyes. Like you didn't have that healthcare experience, and so many times in supply chain we just plug and play from previous experience. When you take someone out, it's like they're not so focused on the details. You might see something that totally makes sense that can help the organization. So I love that, how you walked in that and just having you're like, I'm a little bit intimidated, haven't been in this world, but you felt like you consumed it and you just continue to learn more about that world. But your finance background set you up for success, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, 3+ years into the industry, honestly, I'm still learning something new every day, right? I think I definitely underestimated how much that would play a role. Coming from the accounting world, I'm thinking, revenues are revenue, expenses are expenses, debits and credits are the same no matter what, right? It's all numbers. And that was definitely proved to not be true once I, really got ingrained in the company, got down to the nitty gritty, figuring out what's a LVAD versus a catheter, things like that. But yeah, I think having the fresh eyes and, not coming from the healthcare background, it was both a detriment, learning experience in some ways, but a benefit to me and to the team as well.
How long has the role been in place at CommonSpirit? I mean, obviously you're not the only person representing the finance team within the supply chain team, because CommonSpirit's a pretty big organization. How long have they been doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, as far as I know, as long as the company CommonSpirit has existed, which isn't really that long if you think about it. The merger of Dignity Health and Catholic Health Initiatives happened about 6 years ago. And along with that, there were teams and departments from both legacy organizations, different ways of doing things. There was a big effort to centralize and standardize a lot of the work that was being done. So as far as I know, it was about six years ago that this role cropped up, and kind of a whole team, right? There's the finance manager with a few analysts supporting that role. And another piece of it with the merger with the two legacy entities was doing a lot more at that corporate level. So analysts that maybe formerly were in the regions, one in Texas, one in Seattle, one in LA, centralizing those to the national level and having them support all regions. And that helped us to do things in a more standardized, efficient way and take best practices from one region to another and identify maybe gaps or weaknesses in the way a region was doing things. And again, bring those best practices from a region that's maybe doing things a little more efficiently, I'll say.
What's your day-to-day interaction with supply chain like? I mean, I think there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this and they just don't have any frame of reference. They don't have this role in their organization today.
I want Tyler on my team right now.
Size of their organization. They may have some contact with the CFO or report directly to the CFO. But I'm imagining you're not just working with leadership. You may be working at multiple levels of supply chain. What's that like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And with this newer role, I feel like I'm, the role you still have to wear a few different hats. And one of them is helping our leadership, our supply chain leadership, our VPs who are in close communication with their CFOs, helping them translate, kind of speak the same language as their CFO. The CFO is looking at their income statement and asking what happened here with supply expense, or why are we seeing an uptick at this particular facility, and helping those VPs, our supply chain leaders, to tell the story of supply expense to the finance leaders at their facilities or in their regions, or just more broadly throughout the organization, arming them with that knowledge, doing monthly reporting, monthly variance analysis to say, hey, here's, you can look at we look at the numbers for them and do the analysis and convert that into a story, right? A narrative of what's going on specifically with supply expense, the supply expense line on their income statement.
So what was the learning curve like? I mean, you're coming in, like you said, you didn't have any experience, in healthcare or supply chain. You get thrown into this. Like, how long did it take to kind of figure things out enough that you could tell the story?
All right, try this way, Tyler. Your first week there, and all of a sudden they go, no, we don't do it that way. Do you remember what that was like? What do you mean you don't do it that way? Was there a discussion in that?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, definitely. One of the biggest things was figuring out how they record transactions, kind of the timing of it, right? Like, when does an item hit the income statement? A lot of people without the finance or accounting background might think it's, when the cash changes hands, right? When I pay this person, that's when the expense is recorded. That's not always the case. And actually, more often than not, it's not the case, right? The expenses should be more closely aligned with when the expense was actually incurred, whether or not you paid for that a month ago or are yet to pay for it and will pay for it in a month, right? Yeah, there's a lot to learn. I started in a senior financial analyst role, and it took a good, I'd say 3-4 months to get, my feet under me in that role. It was kind of nice having a monthly cadence of monthly reporting. So I could learn and improve and iterate on past months pretty quickly. There's a pretty short feedback loop on that. But still, I tell a lot of people it's kind of a weird area, right? You can get an undergrad degree in supply chain on its own, or healthcare administration on its own, or finance on its own. And I'm at a position where I'm basically at the intersection of all three, right? So again, we kind of talked about before, I have the finance box pretty well ticked, but I've picked up the supply chain piece and the healthcare piece, picked it up along the way over the past 3 years, kind of going through the school of hard knocks, learning on the job, drinking from the fire hose, all the cliches that you hear.
Yeah, and I think, Tyler, just a quick question. I think about 12-month run rate. I think about all these terms that go back and forth and getting ready to negotiate a contract, whether it's a purchase service agreement, or if it's a med surge item, capital, whatever it is. We always want to find out and do our due diligence on true numbers, not guesstimated numbers. Like, we're only as good as the negotiation to talk to Hayes or Justin about negotiating our power supply, rate, how much we get paid. We got to look back over the last 12 months. We got to figure that out. I mean, we got to ask for an increase. We got to trend it up.
Gary, I'm kind of feeling guilty of what I'm making on this thing. But anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I know. And I seriously.
Taxes are killing me.
Gary, Hayes said I can't do it for free and I have to make more than Gary. So I sent him a check for $1 every January.
Oh my gosh. This was perfect, Tyler. I'm sorry you had to hear this.
Keeping Gary right where he needs to be.
Yeah. I love it. This is good. But seriously, Tyler, are you getting pulled into those high level discussions? I mean, you're pulling the spend, give me the 12-month run so I can go negotiate an agreement with, build the house on the rock, not on the sand, if you will.
Yeah, a little bit from time to time. We have our own analytics team dedicated to sourcing. So a lot of times they are pulling more of that information for those more forward-looking strategic decisions. I like to think of my role typically more as a backwards-looking analysis role of here's what happened and why. But yeah, with the health system as big as this one,
sure, you can have.
There's a lot of those niche areas, and
you can have the org chart a little bit bigger, than the power supply org chart. It's pretty small. Yeah. It's pretty small.
Yeah, I'm honestly pretty thankful for that because getting pulled in quite a few different directions already. With rebates, the monthly supply expense reporting, managing our corporate department income statement, it's quite a handful.
So let me ask you another follow-up question, Tyler, and I know Justin wants to take this back on task. Do you measure like supply expense per equivalent discharge, supply expense for net patient service revenue? Are there metrics that you are looking at that, okay, days cash on hand, now I'm tracking where you're going? Okay.
We don't look at one specifically. We look at a few in combination. We used to focus a lot more on supplies per NPSR, supplies per net patient service revenue, and supplies per adjusted admission. Those are pretty high level metrics. And, particularly with NPSR, that's an accounting number, right? And it can vary wildly from month to month based on reimbursement and all that. So we're definitely getting away from that and looking more at the adjusted admission type volume metrics, even getting a little bit more detailed with adjusted patient days instead of adjusted admissions so that we can factor in length of stay and trending in expenses over surgical cases. We a lot of times would look at supply expense over total surgical procedures, and we're actually even trying to get a little bit more granular, tying our cardiovascular expenses to cardiovascular procedures, our orthopedic expenses to orthopedic procedures. And that's helping us a lot in our variance reporting, right? When we're looking at a variance to budget, what piece of it is due to rate and what piece is due to volume, right? What piece of it is just because we have had great volumes and that's actually probably a good thing. And then what's the leftover chunk that's kind of your unexpected variance that we want to dig into a little bit more and analyze. But, tying it to those volume metrics really kind of, it helps peel back that first layer of the onion that's a lot of times going to be the biggest explanatory factor, which is, hey, we saw more people, we did more of these procedures. So as you'd expect, we have more dollars in our expense line for those items.
Are you able to get a handle on seasonality since you're now looking at it at the service line level? Like I just think about, the holidays and, you just see more motor vehicle accidents and things like that. If you're looking at orthopedics strictly as a service line from an expense standpoint, the seasonality, you said your job is to tell a story. Those are the kinds of stories you're telling?
Yeah. And a lot of times that's not a huge piece of the story just because we're doing our analysis right now we'd be doing analysis of February this year versus February last year. So that seasonality is going to come to play in both periods you're analyzing. Same thing with the budget. We produce our budget guidance and then it's flexed based on anticipated volumes. So that, again, should be baked into our budget. And I say should be because, sometimes we find places where volume adjustments look a little bit out of line and, we find ourselves explaining some of that seasonality that maybe should have got factored in, but didn't, right?
Is there, it seems like we don't have a podcast, nowadays that we don't ask about AI. What role, if any, is that going to play in those analytics looking forward and scheduling and those type of things? Are y'all exploring that?
You got bots.
Yeah, definitely to some extent. CommonSpirit being the huge organization it is, we have our own AI tool equivalent to like a Google Gemini or ChatGPT that we can ask general questions to. But I know the organization is looking more into having specific AI tools built to be able to, one of the big things is with not just in supply chain, but throughout the whole organization, there's all these contracts and terms, pricing, and they're all in these PDF contracts, right? Having some sort of AI tool read through those contracts and turn that unstructured PDF data into structured, spreadsheet data that can then go in, someone can now go in and analyze it.
SLAs, KPIs, and the rebates. And we're going to dive into some of that because I think that's where we start to get hung up, right? And the thing you told me as we prepared is you're like, supply chain talks spend and finance talks expense. And that's usually at the heart of any kind of disconnect when the two different parties are telling a story separate from each other.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's what our sourcing and contracting teams are oftentimes looking at is the spend, because that's what really matters for going out and negotiating a new contract. But when you, again, are talking to your region CFO, they're looking at the expense line, right? And we need to be able to tell them what's going on within that bucket. So, there's a couple major differences between the two, right? Again, spend is usually more closely associated with when the cash is changing hands, whereas expense is more closely associated with when the expense for the item is actually incurred. With, healthcare supplies, that's going to be when the item is used, right? It's hard to get exactly right, but, you can use a proxy of when it's received or when it's issued out of inventory, and that's going to be the timing when it's expense. So, from a
an example of that is like if you buy too much and you're overstocked, the spend looks really high, but the expense doesn't.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But then you could wind up having where there's expired. So then all of a sudden you've got to dig into the fact that because of that timing and because of the overstock, you now have waste. And you've got to attribute for that in the expense and say this wasn't tied to revenue. This is tied to loss. Correct?
Exactly. That's a great example. If you do a big bulk purchase of a slew of items and you're not going to use them for another 2-3 months, you're going to put those in inventory, put them on the balance sheet, and not expense them until they're issued out. So you'd see that spend in month 1, but then not see the expense till month 2 or 3 in that example. And then on the flip side, like you said, with the expired inventory, there's inventory adjustments, write-offs, things like that, where those are going to hit your expenses, but you're not going to see it in the spend. So if you're just looking at spend and there's a big write-off or inventory adjustment and the region CFO says, hey, what's going on here? If you're looking at spend, you're going to be scratching your head too, because you're not going to see those manual journal entries or those adjustments that are coming through, those inventory adjustment GL accounts.
So it's really a timing thing, right?
Yeah.
The timing is off between the two perspectives.
Yeah. That's the biggest piece. And there's some more minor pieces to it. Timing is the biggest one. I mentioned the manual journal entries too. Sometimes we have expenses outside of the normal PO system or inventory issuance system that are only seen as manual journal entries. So that's like another layer on top of the timing issue. I mentioned like the miscellaneous write-offs or discount GL accounts that wouldn't show up in spend. Rebates are another big piece of it. Those are accounted for separately in a separate GL account, a separate general ledger account. So you're not going to see the impact that you might get from, sourcing and contracting have negotiated savings via rebates, and we're effectively getting better pricing, but it's not coming through in a decreased price at the pump. It's on the back end in the form of rebates. So if you're just looking at spend, you're not seeing that full picture with the rebates actually offsetting, decreasing your supply expense.
So I feel like the rebates and admin fees, you just kind of alluded to that, but that's the part that really makes finance crazy, is like trying to because you can't account for that in the way you account for things like Hayes alluded to, coming from another industry. And then all of a sudden you start learning healthcare and it's like, wait a second, this is not the same as other industries. I mean, would you highlight rebates and admin fees as a big part of that is just an enormous challenge?
Yeah, definitely. Rebates and more specifically admin fees are a pretty niche area. Most people coming from an accounting finance background probably haven't heard of them. And even most people with a, purely healthcare background aren't super familiar with what rebates and admin fees are and the distinction between the two, right? Rebates are essentially money back for spend. And like I mentioned, sometimes you get a better price at the pump, but sometimes the vendor needs to see, hey, you need to buy X number of units or spend X number of dollars before you've earned that rebate. So we can't necessarily give it to you up front. We got to analyze the spend over a certain period, determine if you've earned the rebate, and then issue that money back in the form of a rebate. And that's distinct from an admin fee, which admin fees are generated through spend on GPO contracts, group purchasing organization contracts. So that's a way for the GPO to give back to their members. They take in those admin fees from the vendor, a certain percentage. They'll deduct whatever their expenses are and then pass on the rest to their affiliates. And, even a lot of times a system will have rebates and admin fees hit the same GL account, the same expense line as each other, but they are distinct in that way, whereas one of them is earned through the GPO, usually based on a percentage of total spend, and the other is a lot of times pending, a certain contract or initiative if you're meeting certain thresholds with that vendor.
So let's talk rebates real quick. I know we're getting close to the end here, but how do you look at the rebates in terms of who's actually responsible for tracking? Because I feel like this is sometimes where a third party gets involved.
You're opening this up, Justin.
Now
Here
all of a sudden you've got finance trying to figure out what line to put it on. You've got supply chain trying to make sure that they hit the volumes, but not really accountable for tracking them. And then rev cycle trying to make sure that, hey, wait a second, now that we've looked at the contract, and I could even be wrong about rev cycle. I'm not even sure it's structured that way everywhere, but is that your experience? Is that now you've got a third party in there trying to help, coordinate the rebates and utilize and really realizing those savings?
Yeah, we don't right now. It's mostly in-house. And yeah, that's mostly my team doing the collection and distribution of rebates. And a big piece of that is the distribution, right? CommonSpirit is 140 hospitals, even more, smaller facilities along with that. We're going to get one rebate check and they're going to send us a file saying, hey, this single dollar amount is supposed to be divvied up amongst these facilities. And we want to make sure that those facilities get those rebate dollars, and because it's going to help, those rebate dollars are going to be money in their pocket, decreasing their supply expense line, right? So we don't, from a GL perspective, we don't tie it back saying, oh, this was a rebate earned on a cardiovascular expense, so it's going to decrease their cardiovascular supply expense. We have a generic rebate line that is essentially offsetting all supply expense, but we do get the contract category if it was earned on a cardiovascular contract versus an ortho contract versus a food contract. And we put that in our distribution file to tell local accounting to make sure that that money gets back to that accounting unit based on the category of spend that that contract is associated with.
That sounds complicated, particularly as you start going over all your hospitals, all your different units. Yeah. That seems very complicated. And, the guy I always laugh, Tommy from Tulsa would have a hard time doing that. I mean, if he didn't have somebody like you helping with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, rebates within CommonSpirit used to be a full-time job on its own. We've made some efficiencies to the process and automated quite a bit of it. That's helped get that down. And it's now one of many roles that our team of analysts does, kind of more decentralized. But yeah, it's a lot of going back and forth with the vendor, making sure we have all our ducks in a row. We got this check. Does it tie to the payment backup detail that we have? Are we associating the correct detail with the correct rebate? And then combining all that into one for accounting to say, because we do this quarterly. So we say to accounting, hey, of X dollars in rebates, distribute X, Y, and Z to facilities A, B, and C, and tell facilities A, B, and C to record that money coming in to the proper accounting unit. It's quite the complex process.
Yeah. Wow. Like she goes over my head. I mean,
this is exactly why you need somebody in a role like this.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
Like in some organizations, you just have a CFO trying to coordinate that. And I realize it's not 140 hospitals, but still, to get into that granularity, you really do have to have, I think, a deep understanding of the contractual agreements that are coming through purchasing and supply chain to be able to do that correctly. And I can't imagine, I'm sure there are members of the finance team that report up to the CFO that dig through that. But even then, I feel like there's definitely an area of disconnect. I wonder, if we sent out a survey, how well people would think that they're able to manage that complex process. Because like you said, Hayes, it does sound daunting.
Yeah. And it's not the sexiest thing either, right? And it's more of the accounting type function of what we do. And I guess that's the world of accounting. It's usually not the sexiest, most exciting thing every day.
Well, Tyler, somebody's got to do it. And,
yeah, absolutely.
You're doing it within supply chain. And, I think there's going to be some people listening that are going to be jealous.
That they have this. Yeah.
At CommonSpirit have this opportunity. Yeah.
Well done. Well said.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Tyler, thanks so much for coming on the show. And, keep up the good work in your role. And thanks for listening to the podcast too, because I know you listened to several before you came on.
Yeah, definitely. No, of course. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm glad you guys reached out and enjoyed our conversation here today. So thanks for having me on.
That was Tyler Beck, System Manager of Finance, Budgeting, and Financial Reporting, and Supply and Service Resource Management at CommonSpirit. Hayes, really trying to connect the dots between finance and supply chain. It can be a little difficult. I love that CommonSpirit's got this role, and Tyler brings a unique perspective to the show. I think also, it's very clear. It's just the timing of things in supply chain and finance that really create a little bit of the disconnect, when you're trying to tell the story, because they're really two distinctly different stories that you got to tell.
No question. And, he made a pretty good point about, when you buy it, when you use it, all those type of things with rebates and But I would have to say that there are a lot of people listening, I would think, who would say, I wish I had somebody like that on my team, because it's so helpful to have somebody kind of embedded within supply chain and or close by, and that could help on that. So great job, Tyler. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, great job, Tyler. I think finance is just getting so much more involved in supply chain than they ever have in the past too. So you may be getting asked questions out there that you haven't been asked before by finance. And so this is a good little teaser on all of that. But if you want to hear more topics around finance, definitely send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.com. And, we'd love to hear from you. Or maybe you have a similar or varied structure, and you've done some things uniquely to connect finance and supply chain. Would definitely like to continue this line of conversation on the show. So on behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.